Namaste.
Namaste. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon.
Yes. And welcome to Stockholm. We are now
yeah, we're waving at Stockholm. Hi,
virtually.
you guys.
Yes. We have a spreader event occurring in Stockholm right now. Well, welcome. Let's embrace the fear, right? Let's embrace the fear.
Oh, God.
Okay. All right. So welcome you all. We have a fair number of new people. I'm glad to invite you all and joining us into this inquiry. This is the beginning of a series, right? We're doing today and tomorrow, and then the intensive on Saturday. And so the nature of this is to build a momentum in terms of being able to bring forward that in us which separates us from our divine reality and therefore our purpose in life. And part of this is learning to come into relationship with issues and structures that we're not familiar with or have successfully bypassed or avoided in the course of our lives. So welcome to Beyond Fear. It is certainly one of the most defining characteristics in the human system that separate us from a right relationship with existence. So, we're not going to be able to cover the vastness of the fabric of the role of fear and all the different aspects, but we can begin to enter into a conversation about getting familiar with fear. Because like shame or danger, these are doorways. They're all entry points into coming into relationship with existence more fully. So the idea here is to be able to develop a way of holding what before you weren't paying attention to or were caught up in or were so vigorously living with that you didn't know it was there. And that's the power of fear. It's a basic corruption, you might say, of the possibility of being that comes as a consequence of being self-aware people, right? The problem of self-awareness is we separate ourselves from the oneness that everything else living is connected to. Now, we don't know that's the problem because there's so many advantages to being self-aware, to wake up and to discover and to create and to explore and all these other things, to have choice, to have mobility, but the price we pay carries with it this separation from the purposeful current that holds all the rest of existence. So this is kind of pointing to what Beyond Fear means or what it reflects, is really our ability to be in the right relationship with existence, which brings us to a conversation of faith. Because if we look at the nature of our ability to know our own resilience, our own yet to be discovered qualities of ourself, then we don't have access to the inevitable evolution of ourselves as human beings and as spiritual beings as life unfolds. And we have a tendency thereby to cling to what we know, to pull away, even consciously or semi-consciously or unconsciously, from that new territory that very likely becomes a doorway to the next unfolding of our developmental self. Ultimately, it is about coming into existence in a way where fear is not the definer of what's possible for us. So the opportunity here, what we're going to do is we're going to look to explore as a conversation. First, it's going to be whatever comes forward, and then in the later part, interacting with you in this particular focus. Because the way I see that we can use our self-awareness is our intelligence, our discerning, informed intelligence, and its capacity to explore territory in domains that our emotional and physical body would not willingly go. You see, if you're in a battlefield, fear is very much on the surface, especially in the immediacy or an imminent event where there is a possibility of death. So this possibility of dying, or would I say the peril, comes forward. It's inevitable. That fear will reveal itself, and you will begin to find and discover, and most importantly, learn to live with that event that occurs when you're on the imminent threshold of something where you don't know what the outcome may be. That's pointing to an extreme example. But we live in our mind is basically a virtual world. Our mind has an avatar of us in past and future and present, other presents than the ones we're living or have lived. So if you look at the nature of mind in our self-awareness, we can discover all kinds of peril from that vantage point at living into these moments that are not likely to happen, but could happen, or maybe might happen, or it happened to someone else somewhere, and therefore it could happen. So the mind in the virtual world really doesn't know fear. It just knows an idea of fear. And that idea of fear is really the idea of fear, fearing fear. So the very fundamental thing of the mind is we're very isolated from the very event of fear arising in our vital or physical body. But unwittingly, we start creating in our vital and our physical body a fear stress reaction simply through our virtual world. Because everything is connected, the body, intelligence, the vital, the heart, the desires, the fear, the habits of being are all interconnected to whatever we're imagining. That's why when we go to a movie, it's just lights on a screen. In our computer, it's just lights and shape and color and events. And the mind is what makes that into a reality. And we immerse ourselves in these, and we lose ourselves in that. I mean, what do we lose? We lose the immediacy of us sitting in a chair with our computer or looking at the TV of what's actually happening. So we're in a virtual world where fear and courage and pain and loss and all this is happening, but it's all virtual, but it's impacting our whole system. So if you begin to look at the nature of that which fears, you begin to question the part that is the best fear creator of all, this thing. It's projections, it's imaginations, it's taking the past structures of things that may have happened to you that you don't want to have happen again, either consciously or unconsciously, and having a filter that looks out, peeks out through its boundaries of safety and comfort and familiarity and says, oh, is that scary or not? Is that worth it or not? Do I want to be there or not? And therefore, what begins to organize what's possible for us is our fear story, is the past, present, future story that we are unwittingly being defined by due to this unmet part, this incapacity in us to be able to come into existence without the approximations of mind, without fully understanding, without being able to go beyond the calculation of benefit or loss, to come into life without the filters. See, that would be terrifying for someone on a fear-based reality. So it's inevitable on spiritual path, as it is in the course of a dynamic life where you encounter much of life through the consequences of your activities and your work and your circumstances, in that it forces you to discover how you're limiting yourself, how you're defining what's possible. So the important thing about your awakened consciousness, the important thing about this quality of awareness or experience that you've come to is you connecting to something larger than you thought you were. You're connected to what you are, both in your awareness or in your experience, this greater being, this greater capacity for knowing. And so inherent in that is the capacity to be able to see the blinders, to see how we're unwittingly defining reality based on past experience or structures, such as being overwhelmed when we were children, such as pain or loss or grief, that shape our ability, our how we define the present and the future moments, what might happen and what could happen. So we begin to get right down to the roots of the very visceral structure that actually lives in our body. It's the reptilian organization of our human embodiment that has fear as a fundamental basis of our physical existence. Now, that's not so much there in a child. If you look at children, fear is not defining. It's comfort or discomfort. It's having attention or not having attention. So they don't know fear, but that's because they're ignorant. And that's tamasic relationship with fear, is you don't know you're in, that there is anything to be afraid of. But of course, that naivete makes you vulnerable to the inevitable events that happen when you're a child crawling around and you're looking at this interesting flame coming out of the stove and you want to touch it, right? What was that? So there's a shock, an event, right? And that event triggers this primal root of, oh God, there's things I don't know that I may need to worry about. Maybe I need to be more safe. I need to make sure I'm safe. I make sure it's okay. And maybe somebody else knows how to do that because I now found out I don't know jack shit. So really, fear is actually an opening to the physical reality of our embodiment. That's where it starts. It starts that you can fall and hurt. You can play and play and play, and then you get exhausted and cranky because you need food or rest. There is these limits to what you can do as you're coming into existence that begin to become the basis of caution or fear or hesitancy or suspicion or distrust, self-distrust or distrust around you. So when we begin to talk about the conversation of fear, we're talking about an architectural design structure right there in the fabric of the organization of our individual self as a person and as a being coming into the fullness of the truth of what we are. These habits, these patterns, of course, are embedded in the body. And of course, fear can come up in many different ways. It can be fear, but what you experience is anger. What you experience is a reaction of judgment or speech or a fighting attitude, which isn't listening or receiving anything, but attacking imagined and real fears indiscriminately. Protection, so aggressive defensiveness. And then there's a passive defensiveness where you never come out of the shell of yourself. And you just sneak along the way and then express your anger and your judgment in ways that you can't be found out being the source of. The strategies of betrayal and manipulation, lies and deceit. See, are you kind of getting it? Right? You're kind of recognizing how this is, it's not just this neurotic thing where we're caught in our mind about what might happen, what could happen, what did happen, and maybe could happen again. This is a spinning in the virtual reality. But really, we're looking to try to find the fundamentals of fear because it has a place, right? It teaches a child to be careful about fire. It has a place as we come into existence to have reasonable caution or fear about things that we do not yet know or aware of are danger or risky or could harm us or others. So how do we do this is we have to learn how to be with fear. Now, we either do that as human beings because the course of life is inevitably going to bring events that you didn't know or unexpected that cause suffering or pain or diminishment or anguish or loss. So therefore, there is this learning how to come into existence that will inevitably be teaching us how to do that. We'll say, okay, go there. There's a greater likelihood of things working than if you go there. So it is an early discerning. It's a waking up to the peril of having a body in existence. Now, unfortunately, we live in bubbles. We live in a civilized world. We don't have to go out and farm and fight off the Indians or fight off the wild animals or the attacks of other tribes. We live in this bubble of relatively low risk, speaking historically. Of course, there's many things that happen even in that bubble, but the principle is mostly we live in anticipation of something we don't yet know, even if everything around us is so comparatively safe. I mean, just look at here in isolated, Washoe Valley, where people on acre or larger lots, and the fear around the pandemic, it's just like, oh my God. And what happens with fear is we end up with a distorted relationship with reality, at least until we know better. And if you look at the way the pandemic hit the world, first it was like, yeah, this can't be, that's not anything. That's Tamasic fear, the denial. Then it's, oh my God, what could this be? And then there's that overreaction. But after a while, after you've lived in your house for some months, you become used to that fear in a way that is no longer shaping going outside and seeing some friends or going to the movie or the rest. You begin to get more comfortable. And therefore, then the fear becomes a more realistic assessment of what is actually happening in your relationship with that. So when we come to the spiritual path, one of the bitches of the spiritual path is we don't live in our body. We go into a domain which is essentially virtual relative to our embodiment, and we begin to experience things of different dimensions and different aspects. And unfortunately, we bring the blinders of our fear-adapted self into those domains. And we become afraid or suspicious or distrustful. Now, some of these are practical cautions. Some of these are actually unwarranted adaptations that prevent us from moving into a relationship with just actually a newness, something we do not yet know, something that's outside of the boundary of our existence. So how to be with fear, how to recognize a truth or an untruth of that component that arises in us when we find ourselves vulnerable or uncertain, when we find ourselves in a moment of peril, a possible loss, or a possible frustration of a desired outcome. This is part of the opportunity that fear as a doorway becomes. It gives a context that's other than fear itself. It gives a context that says fear is a doorway into a more true relationship with existence in all its dimensions, from the lowest physical survival struggles to the efforting of yourself coming into existence and getting approval and finding a place for yourself, or in taking care of your children or your loved ones, or in your awakening process, trusting a teacher, trusting the process, learning how to expand into the unlimited boundaries of possibilities that spirituality open up for us. So this is a very relevant conversation to this work, to have a context, to recognize that if fear is arising, either in your mind or in your vital or in your body, that's an opportunity to come in existence in a way other than you've been able to before. And that includes your own spiritual existence, the ultimate fabric of existence. Now, simultaneously, it is a process. Fear is an initial reaction to something not yet known. It is a instinctive or imagined structure that comes up to address something that we don't know is there or don't yet know how to be with, or have some fear or dread about what that might mean. And therefore, the strategies of avoidance or protection or security become stronger so that you shut down the opportunity or try to control the opportunity of what fear presents. So when I look at this, I look at people who deal with physical fear, like I shared about a warrior on the battlefield, but people who deal with it regularly, like emergency people, paramedics, firefighters, the police, where fear is actually one of the organizing principles that allow them to do their job. It is this learning how to have enough presence and consciousness in the midst of fear, which might not be your own. It might be the fear of the person you're trying to help. It might be the fear that's shaping a violent confrontation between two people, man and wife, or gang members on the street. This ability to be with fear in their lives becomes a regular event. So they learn how to be with fear and fulfill their purpose. See, some people, that is their dharma. There is their dharma to be a warrior, to be the battlefield, that the protector, the preserver, and they're warrior-like in that. And because that's their dharma, the fear is their doorway to what others would call courage. But for them, it's their dharma, the fulfillment of the reason they live. And every moment they can meet that fear, it validates a quality of their own being that fulfills them in a way that they're willing to do this again, willing to take the chance, willing to live on that edge of danger. And what is that quality in them that becomes available to them that other human beings who avoid fear as a strategy or bypass it or don't have literally the opportunity or even the dharmic orientation to do would not know? Now that quality of being we call courage. For them, it's not courage, it's their job. And it's their job because they have a sense of serving. They have a sense of helping. They have a sense of being useful. So even in the human domain, the spiritual attainments become accessible. Gita says, I am the strength of the strong. I am the strength of those who live, who have desire aligned with their purpose, with their dharma. And that is where all these talks are leading to discover that quality of you that others may see as courage, but what you know as truth, what you know as the capacity inherent in your being is greater than what you knew before. A capacity to become in a open, vulnerable, immediate relationship with existence. So how do we grow in that? We become familiar with our fear. We begin to recognize how it shapes our perspective. We begin to notice in our body the dread or the anticipation or the anxiety, that quality of, I call existential stress, that us self-aware human beings, unique to all animals, carry, such that we create all these strange adaptations like getting drunk or sleeping a lot or, avoiding life as a conscious effort. So when we begin to look and we feel into this fundamental design that's in our vital, we begin to discover its physical roots. The physical roots of fear have a validity for the body itself, about its survival and its ability to live long enough to exist. So when we begin to meet fear, our fearing, the whole thing that fear is, which is basically a no, or at least a doubt about what's arising, we begin to move into a new relationship with existence by becoming familiar with it. Being willing to be fearful, being willing to be vulnerable, willing not to know, willing to be outside the boundary of what you're familiar with, the ability to speak to a group of new people you don't know, to share your innermost secrets that you've hidden from so many other people, rather than take the chance of being diminished or rejected. How many things in our life are shaped by that fundamental, true adaptation for our physical life, but gets distorted as it goes into our emotional nature and our relational nature, and it goes into our, God forbid, mind. But there is also a subtler fear called the psychic fear. And that is the fear that's essentially doubting its own existence. Psychic fear doubts its own existence. There's a psychological component of diminishment, a shame, of fear of the unknown, the boogeyman, the whole thing that creates conspiracy theories and superstitions and imaginings and ruminations that all are based on some fundamental error of imagining. And so imagining, when it comes out of the mind, is simply in our thoughts, but there's an imagining that comes out of something between our mind and our being, which is the psychic. And that's what creates boogeymen in the closets. That's what imagines realities that actually there's no basis for. That's the one that lives in the castles it creates, where we put those people in hospitals where they're restrained and under medication, right? So this psychic imaginings compounds the problem of our awakening, because the psychic expands in our awakening. And we start meeting evidence of our fear in that psychic awakening state. And if we're not grounded, if we haven't actually found fear basis in our physicality, then fear is shaping what's possible. Right? Even talking about that, I can sense the boogeyman thing coming up. You know, the bad spirits, the dark forces. Ooh, hide, 4th of July or Halloween, right? What do kids love about Halloween, right? It's just all that scary shit, right? We love the scary shit. It's actually healthy to love the scary shit, but it's still in our imagination. The scary shit brings us into a relationship of enjoyment with fear. So in fact, it can be healing to watch a scary movie. It can actually bring you into a virtual version of what's needed in your embodiment. Yeah, I remember Shriat Mananda and his gang of people that he dragged around the world, we went to a place outside of Sedona where there was a teacher called Guruji. And she had this fantastic setup at the time. I thought it was really great. A living room that had like 30 reclining chairs, cushy, comfortable, where you could put your feet up. And that's where she gave all her talks. That's where I learned that actually being relaxed is very helpful for meditation. But she also had this room, also cushy, with all the pornography, all the scary movies, all the movies you wouldn't want to watch, where people were obligated to watch them. And they spent their time in this kind of like basement room, no windows, no lights, this huge screen TV, and encountered all their issues as the movie unfolded. And what she recognized is that even that enabled them to come into relationship with the parts of themselves that were still unmet, that were distorting their ability to be open up to existence in a way that would serve their spiritual unfolding. So she's right on the same truth. It is why any teacher will test their students by pushing them into situations where they're outside of their boundaries. Because it's recognized that when we begin to do so, we start discovering a quality we could call courage within ourselves that gives us the strength to step into life in greater immediacy and readiness. Now, so actually, it's a wonderful conversation to have. It's a wonderful discovery to be engaged in, because what you discover, and of course, this is tomorrow's talk, is freedom. What you discover is a new way to be. All right, so that's looking at the last chapter. But the principle here is that we have a true authority that fear protects us from, that keeps us safe from, that obscures our ability to know. We have a truth of being that is, by its inherent design, fearless. It doesn't exist. Now, where might that be in your life? Where's fear when you're grateful? When you're in gratitude? Is fear there? Huh? What is it when you're in love? When you're really in love, not the anticipation of getting it or losing it, but in love, is fear there? Now, you dive deep into love. Yeah, there could be. Inside human love, certainly, there could be fear as part of this shaping. But there is some states of being by which there is no fear. For example, discovering something new, or an excited sense of possibility. Although fear may be shaping that, it is a fear that actually makes the possibility more tangible. So that fear has a role by giving an edge to becoming. Fear has a role in waking us up from our tamas and from waking us into rajas. And when we become rajas, we become more aware of the peril, which then opens the doorway of waking up to our sattva, which is beyond peril. It is, peril is the doorway. So there is a role of fear in the waking up of human consciousness, but it's also played a role in the evolution of all of life. Fear, loss, pain, all of these were meant to assist this evolving possibility of consciousness becoming awake in existence. So fear in the most self-aware beings of creation is a part of the fabric of our coming into existence. So we don't want to throw out the fear, as the unfortunate quality of our existence these days is we live in our distraction. We live in the unimportant things. We live in the things that don't matter. And then unwittingly making them more important than any reality that is apparent to us at the moment. And then when the truck hits us, when we get bombed on, when the lightning strikes, we're unprepared. We go into blah, shock, non-existence. So fear has a role to play. I mean, in the folding of my human life, I can remember moments, physical fear came up, where I had the option of taking an action or not taking an action. And I know so many of us don't take the action that our fear is saying don't take. But I discovered it was a doorway fairly young. I discovered that when first example of that was when I was 18. When I was 15, I left home. I had no fear leaving home, leaving everything, leaving school, leaving home. I had no fear, but that was partially ignorance. Partially, my male testosterone determining a future that didn't give a damn about the consequence, right? But there was this moving into life in new ways that came out of that. We all should have a little bit, male or female, because you begin to discover that you can be different. You're much more resilient than you know. We're much more capable than we know. We're much more able to meet the challenges of life than we have tested ourselves usually. So in this case was, I've shared this many times, but I love to share it again. I was hiking with my friend. I was 18 at this time, and I've been away from home for some time. And we were looking for risks. We were looking for challenge. We were rebellious, angry male banging around, seeing where the adventure was. And we came upon this pool where we were going to set up our camp. And then we saw these kids jumping off, coming out of the sky, falling into this little pool of water. And we watched one after another doing this. And we were saying, wow, look at this. They're falling like, 100 feet. I don't know how far it was, something like, not that much, maybe 6 stories. So we went up there, found the trail, found out where they were going because they had to walk back up to do it again, right? Kids, guy children, but some girl children too. Loved the adventure. So we went up there, got up where they were all standing, lining up, and I looked and all I saw was a sloping hilltop. There was no visual sign that there was a pond after that dropped off. And they were just running without care off this cliff. So I was saying, how do they do that? Because I was so present with the part of me that had never done such a thing. And it was so tangible in my body, I almost couldn't be in it. And it was so bad that running off the cliff was better than being in my body with that experience. And so I ran off the cliff. And when I was getting to the edge of the cliff, I was in hyper awareness. I couldn't see what I was jumping into. It wasn't until I leaped off the cliff that I could see the pond so far, so small away. And the thought in my mind was, I just fucked up seriously. And then there was this endless moment of maybe, 5-6 seconds, or maybe a little bit more, the endless moment before I hit the water. And at those moments, I was in absolute terror. And I hit the water, I was fine. And I came out, I was so jazzed, so thrilled. It was like, wow, what happened? I had no idea that it was an antecedent of the rest of my life. But it was a moment of meeting the fear with this crazy thing that came up, which ended up to be some kind of courage. But it was just kind of a madness that took me beyond myself. And then my friend did it. He was bigger than me, had longer legs. And I could tell he had jumped too far. And I was worried to death for him because it looked like he was going to miss the pond. And, falling off of 6 stories is not a happy ending. But he hit it. He hit it in the shallows, but he didn't hurt himself. The mud apparently cushioned the hit. So I was aware that looking at someone else being courageous is almost as bad as being the one being courageous. It was like painful to watch. And here are these kids just hopping up, running up the mountain again and chopping, it's just like, so what is that evidence of? It's what I'm speaking of. Learning to live on the edge opens our capacity to go beyond fear. Learning the nature of the fear and how to mobilize it as a means of, in a new way. And how do you mobilize fear? You put it into your body. You got to find it in the experiential vibration of your body. Because when you do, you'll notice that it's an awakening energy in form of excitement, you might say. But Thomas will make it feel like dread. The psychic will make it into all kinds of imaginings of why you shouldn't be there and feel that. It has all its strategies for bypassing being in the body. So therefore, actually being in the body in the event of fear or meeting the fear itself as a conscious choice, as an energy in your body, is not easy for our psychic being. That's why we have to ground ourselves in the physical body. And fear is a powerful core means of entering into that. Once you meet the energetics of fear in your body, the uncomfortable energetics of it, in this context of discovering to be with fear, you begin to notice something other than the fear itself. You begin to notice that it's an awakening event that can be encouraged and directed to different parts of your body. That becomes a power, a force. I call it, it's the expression of Shakti that's based on a truth of our existence. See, truth has more to do with existing, than Shakti, which has to do with being in existence. So truth always shows up on the edge between existing and non-existing. So when we meet fear in our body, we begin to move into a relationship with that quality of ourselves that is on the threshold between existing and non-existing. This ability to be there is the power inherent in our embodied consciousness to know the immediacy of truth. Okay, I think that's it. I think everything that needed to be said was said. I think you can just be with yourself for a minute. Let's just take a few minutes before I open it up to the room to just be what showed up for you in your body, in your system. Just be present with yourself and your body, not with any ideas that have come up, but in your body. Feel what your body is doing. I can feel what my body is doing. It's quite excited. It feels the thrill of what I now know, what truth is. Thrill of truth in the body. And what does that have to do with going beyond fear? Well, perhaps that has to do with freedom. What might that say about what we are in truth?